Coverage continues here at the 2019 NHL Scouting Combine in Buffalo, New York. Tony Brar here alongside Jack Michaels and Bob Stauffer, as we are pleased to be joined by Sportsnet Sam Cosentino. Sam, thanks so much for doing this. We know you're a busy man right now.
No, real pleasure. We've had this relationship going here for the last few years, and I hope it continues moving
Well,
forward.
pleasure we can keep it going and satisfying your needs when it comes to accommodating to you on this busy day. But Sam, when it comes to the 2019 NHL Draft, yesterday NHL Director of Central Scouting, Dan Moore, said that this is a top-end draft when it comes to the first 30 to 40 players. Is that a testament that you share as well?
Yeah, no question. I think there are some ledges there. I think things are going to get really interesting once we get past 5. There's a couple of wild cards in there as I look at Vasily Podkolzin. What's he going to end up doing? Where's he going to go? And then I look at what's happened in the playoffs. A heavy team like St. Louis, does that put more of a premium on a guy like a Kirby Dach? Or you look at the speed game that enabled Washington to do what it did last year, and does that elevate someone like Dylan Cousins? But then as you move down into the middle stages, I think there's a little bit more stability there. And then probably once you get to 20, you're going to see a wide group of guys, probably 20 players deep, where a lot of teams might be itching to move up just a little bit because they're going to see players that they have a little higher ranked in the first round that will still be available in round number 2. It's going to be a lot of fun.
You mentioned Dylan Cousins, and there's actually been a lot of speculation about him both going up and potentially falling a bit. The Oilers are picking, as you know, 8th and 38th. So give me a couple of guys you see at 8, and then maybe a couple of mid to late first rounders who might slide to 38 that could be in play for Edmonton.
Well, if I'm looking at number 8, I mean, again, that wide variety of guys, and I think that could be anyone from Philip Broberg to Dylan Cousins to Kirby Dach. Maybe Trevor Zegras is a guy who's available there, Matthew Boldy as well, and Cole Caulfield. How it's hard to ignore that goal scoring. But that's the group that I'm talking about that is really, I think, on a lot of team lists, very interchangeable. So I would suspect one of those guys would be available to Edmonton at number 8. When you get to 38, that's where you're going to find a lot of interest because of those number of players in that 20 to 40 range that are going to be available. And so some guys I'd be looking at there, maybe a guy like Nils Hoglander. You look at his workout videos, they're absolutely legendary, played in the SHL, so he's got that experience already. I don't think someone like Ville Heinola, I think he's going to be a little bit higher up. Moritz Seider probably a little higher up. But when getting back into that 38 range, a lot of people start to think about that Alex DeBrincat type player, that if you can steal someone there who had that basically translatable to first round numbers, someone might be there. So is that a Braden Tracy and Alexei Protas? Is it someone a little bit more like Simon Holmstrom, who's battled injuries all year, yet when he's at his best, he's a really good player. So I do think there's a wide variety of options at 38.
You brought up numbers, and I want to discuss numbers for a second. How do you sort of evaluate and contrast the guys with the U.S. National Development Program, a bunch of elite guys all playing together, against the individual? Like Kirby Dach goes into Saskatoon, they're a rebuilding franchise. Kootenay, rebuilding franchise, Peyton Krebs. So how difficult is it to compare and contrast those sorts of players?
Yeah, it is really hard. And even in the U.S. program in and of itself, there's those discrepancies because you're playing against college programs and then you're playing against USHL. So there's a different level of competition inherent just in that group alone. And then you add that third layer of playing internationally against the age group. So most of the time they're playing above their age group, and then they get into international competition, U18, and now they're playing in their age group. So it's really hard to extrapolate the numbers because inherently in that group playing against so many different age groups. And now you're trying to match up against the guy who's playing in the SHL. Well, he's played against men. The one thing that rings true, if you're looking at all the numbers, I think about Capo Caco and what he's been able to do compared to Rantanen, compared to Kotkaniemi, compared to Laine, compared to Barkov. His numbers are very favorable with all of those guys, and I would argue at least 2 of those 3 players are amongst the top 25 players in the world. So I think there is something to be said about extrapolating those numbers when it comes to the rest of the group, CHL versus USHL versus the under-18 program. It's a really difficult thing to do, and that's why I think you can't get too focused on the numbers.
Now, immediately after the draft lottery, you did a quick mock draft, and you had Kirby Dach falling to number 8. Now, in your discussions with some people here, I know in my discussions, I feel like his stock is rising a little bit here. There's a really good chance that Kirby Dach could be taking the first top 5 picks.
There's no question about it, Tony, and honestly, I do believe he's in that interchangeable group. But like I was mentioning before, I think the thing that's really impressed me and impressed people is it's a mirror league. So you look at what's happening. Remember when the LA Kings won and everyone said, oh, we got to get big and tough and brawny. And then you go and you look at the Chicago Blackhawks. When they won their championships, everyone's saying, well, we got to have that nice mix of leadership and skill and speed. And then you look at the Boston Bruins, where they're maybe a smaller team with some brawn, and now they've become bigger. So when it becomes a copycat league, and I think we tend to draft copycatting on what's happening in the league right now. And again, I'll harken back to St. Louis and the way they play, big, heavy, the Ryan O'Reilly type guys. He's kind of very much in the same vein of what a Kirby Dach brings to the table. So now you're looking at speed, you're looking at skill, but then you add that third element of size. And even seeing him here today, he's probably going to play 15 or 20 pounds heavier. He's going to be a monster.
Sam, when I arrived at this draft, I mean, and you kind of knew it going in, but Jack Hughes, consensus #1 player overall, consensus #1 forward. Spencer Knight, consensus #1 goalie. I don't hear of anyone really challenging him. What about the D-core in your estimation?
Well, it's really interesting because you go back to last year, record 14D were taken. So now I'm looking at this year and I'm at the midway mark and I'm saying, you know what? There are defensemen here that I think are pretty good. But for whatever reason in the second half, we saw a whole number of guys start to step up. The reemergence of Philip Broberg at the under-18s. Thomas Harley basically came from nowhere in Mississauga and became a point producer, one of those wild card guys who really likes to skate and use the ice. Moritz Seider, how do you deny a guy who won the Rookie of the Year playing with men in Germany, who added 15 pounds this year, who is, when he goes back and plays with his age group, he's a captain, he's a leader. That guy's on his team in the DEL, absolutely love him. And the list goes on when you think about Soderstrom, Ville Heinola. I mean, now I'm looking at a class of probably 7 or 8 guys that I think are top-notch defensemen, when 3 or 4 months ago, if you had asked me that, I would have said this is much more a center-focused draft, which I still believe it is, but we've seen a great emergence of the defensemen in the second half.
All right, one final one for you. It's just a quick hitter. Give me one guy that's been a consensus top 10 pick that might slide out of the top 10, and give me a name where a lot of people maybe right now got him 12 through 20 that works his way into the top 10.
Podkolzin for me is the guy. I have him as a top 10 guy all day long. I have him as a top 5 guy. There's no holes in his game. He just needs to get stronger.
But he could slide, you think?
I think he can slide because of the contractual situation. And quite frankly, there are some teams that are afraid to draft Russian players for fear that even if you do bring them over right away, that they're going to move back. When I look at a guy in that range of maybe 12 to 14, Cam York is a guy who really jumps out at me. And, you know, with the year he had, he looks to me, even at the start of the year when I saw him in Minnesota, that he's grown a little bit. But his game really evolved over the course of the year, got valuable minutes and high leverage minutes on a really good team. So he's a guy I could see slipping in there.
Sam, we appreciate your time. We might have to start paying you the big bucks if you continue this relationship moving forward. But Oilers TV and EdmontonOilers.com will have you covered with the draft just over 3 weeks away now. Well, just under 3 weeks away now, including a mock draft with Jack, Michaels, and Bob Stauffer. Guys, #1 rule, you can't call Sam, all right?
I can't promise that.
You ain't cheating if you ain't trying.
Signing off for the 2019 NHL Scouting Combine, I'm Tony Brar.